Have you ever looked at successful people and quietly wondered why confidence seems to follow them everywhere, while your own sense of value sometimes feels fragile and uncertain? The psychology of self-worth begins with a simple but powerful question many people silently carry throughout life. Am I truly enough just as I am? From childhood experiences to daily social interactions, our minds constantly gather signals that slowly shape the invisible belief system we call self-worth. Surprisingly, self-worth is not simply about confidence or achievements, but about the deeper belief that our existence has value independent of success, failure, praise, or criticism. Many people believe confidence creates success, yet psychologists often observe the opposite pattern, where a stable sense of self-worth quietly becomes the foundation that allows confidence to grow. When someone secretly doubts their worth, even small challenges can feel like personal verdicts, turning ordinary mistakes into painful evidence that they are somehow not good enough. In contrast, individuals with healthy self-worth often experience setbacks differently, seeing them as temporary events rather than permanent judgments about their character, abilities, or potential. This difference in perception may appear subtle, yet it dramatically shapes motivation, relationships, career choices, emotional resilience, and even the goals people believe they deserve to pursue. Self-worth functions like an internal lens, quietly coloring how we interpret compliments, criticism, opportunities, and failures throughout everyday life. Imagine two people receiving the same feedback from a manager at work. One hears helpful guidance, while the other hears confirmation that they are inadequate or disappointing. The words are identical, yet the interpretation changes completely depending on the listener's inner belief about their own value. This internal belief system rarely appears suddenly. Instead, it develops slowly through years of experiences, relationships, expectations, and messages absorbed from family, culture, and society. During childhood, even small interactions, such as praise, criticism, attention, or neglect, can begin shaping how a person unconsciously measures their own worth. Children often interpret the world in very personal ways, believing events around them must somehow reflect their own value or behavior. When encouragement is consistent and balanced, children gradually learn that mistakes are part of growth rather than proof of personal failure. However, when validation feels unpredictable or conditional, many individuals develop a habit of constantly seeking approval to reassure themselves that they matter. This pattern can quietly continue into adulthood, where achievements, relationships, and social recognition become tools used to measure personal value. Psychologists call this pattern conditional self-worth, meaning a person feels valuable only when certain conditions, achievements, or expectations are successfully fulfilled. While ambition and improvement are healthy, tying self-worth entirely to performance can create constant pressure and emotional instability. When success happens, confidence rises briefly, but when difficulties appear, self-doubt returns quickly and intensely. This emotional cycle can leave people feeling as if their value rises and falls like a fragile stock market, depending on external circumstances. Social media has amplified this dynamic in modern life, where comparisons occur constantly through images, achievements, lifestyles, and carefully curated moments of success. Even when people logically understand that online content shows only highlights, the emotional brain may still interpret those comparisons as evidence of personal inadequacy. Over time, repeated comparisons can quietly weaken self-worth by shifting attention away from personal growth and toward measuring oneself against others. Yet psychological research consistently reveals an important truth. Genuine self-worth grows not from comparison, but from self-acceptance and realistic self-understanding. Self-acceptance does not mean ignoring weaknesses or avoiding improvement, but rather recognizing that personal value exists independently from temporary performance or external validation. People with strong self-worth still pursue goals, work hard, and seek progress, yet their identity does not collapse when outcomes differ from expectations. Instead of thinking, "I failed, therefore I am worthless," they learn to think, "This attempt failed, but my ability to learn and improve remains." This shift in interpretation might appear small, yet it transforms how the brain processes setbacks and protects emotional resilience. Neuroscience studies suggest that beliefs about personal value can influence how the brain reacts to stress, feedback, and social evaluation. When self-worth feels stable, the brain processes criticism more. To truly understand self-worth, we must explore the invisible psychological forces that slowly shape how people evaluate themselves long before they consciously begin questioning their value. Many of these forces begin during childhood, when the human brain is still learning how to interpret attention, approval, correction, and emotional reactions from important figures like parents and teachers. Children naturally look to caregivers for signals about safety, belonging, and personal value, making these early interactions powerful influences on the beliefs that later define self-worth. When encouragement feels consistent and supportive, children gradually learn that their value does not disappear simply because they make mistakes or face temporary struggles. However, when approval appears only after achievements or perfect behavior, the mind may learn an unintended lesson that worth must always be earned through performance. This belief can quietly grow into a lifelong pattern where people feel valuable only when they are productive, successful, admired, or meeting expectations set by others. Psychologists often describe this pattern as performance-based self-worth, where personal value becomes tightly connected to accomplishments rather than intrinsic human dignity. In such cases, even impressive achievements may not fully satisfy the mind, because the feeling of worth disappears quickly once the next challenge appears. Instead of creating lasting confidence, success becomes a temporary emotional relief that must constantly be repeated to maintain a sense of personal value. At the same time, criticism during childhood can also shape self-worth depending on how it is delivered and interpreted by the developing mind. Constructive guidance that focuses on behavior helps children learn and improve without questioning their personal value or identity. But criticism that feels harsh, unpredictable, or deeply personal may lead children to believe they themselves are flawed rather than simply learning new skills. Over time, these interpretations can become internalized voices that continue influencing thoughts long after childhood experiences have passed. Many adults notice an inner critic that repeats phrases like, "You are not good enough," or "You will probably fail again," even when there is little evidence supporting those fears. This internal voice often reflects old emotional patterns that once helped individuals interpret difficult situations, but now limit confidence and self-trust. Cultural expectations can also play a powerful role in shaping self-worth by defining what success, beauty, intelligence, or achievement should supposedly look like. When people feel they do not match these expectations, they may begin measuring their value against unrealistic standards that few individuals could realistically maintain. This is especially common in highly competitive environments where constant comparison becomes a normal part of education, careers, and social recognition. Comparison itself is a natural cognitive process, yet it can easily become harmful when individuals use it as the primary tool for evaluating personal worth. When someone consistently compares themselves to people who appear more successful, talented, or confident, the mind may gradually develop a distorted self-image. In reality, every person's circumstances, resources, opportunities, and experiences differ dramatically, making direct comparison an unreliable measurement of personal value. Yet the emotional brain often ignores these complexities, focusing instead on simplified conclusions such as, "They are better than me," Over time, these conclusions may slowly transform into beliefs that shape identity, confidence, and expectations for the future. Interestingly, psychological research suggests that self-worth also becomes strongly connected to belonging and social acceptance. Humans evolved as social beings, meaning the brain naturally monitors signs of rejection or approval within groups and communities. When people feel valued and respected within relationships, their sense of worth often strengthens naturally without conscious effort. But when individuals experience repeated rejection, exclusion, or emotional neglect, the brain may interpret these signals as evidence of personal inadequacy. This reaction is not a personal weakness, but rather a natural survival mechanism designed to maintain social connection and belonging. Unfortunately, the same mechanism can sometimes misinterpret temporary conflicts or misunderstandings as deeper threats to personal value. Another important factor influencing self-worth is the way people interpret their own internal thoughts and emotional reactions. Many individuals assume that negative thoughts about themselves must be accurate, simply because those thoughts feel convincing or emotionally intense. However, psychologists emphasize that thoughts are not always reliable replay. Once self-worth forms in the mind, it begins influencing life in ways many people rarely notice, quietly shaping decisions, reactions, and opportunities across relationships, careers, and personal growth. One of the most powerful effects appears in the risks people are willing to take when pursuing goals, dreams, and meaningful opportunities in life. Individuals with stronger self-worth often feel comfortable exploring new challenges because they do not interpret every possible failure as a threat to their identity or personal value. On the other hand, those struggling with low self-worth may hesitate before even trying, worrying that mistakes will confirm their deepest fears about not being capable enough. This hesitation can quietly limit growth because many important opportunities require courage, experimentation, and occasional failure before success becomes possible. Over time, avoiding these risks can create the illusion that someone lacks ability, when the real issue was simply the fear of testing their potential. Self-worth also strongly influences the types of relationships people accept and maintain throughout their lives. When someone believes they deserve respect, kindness, and honesty, they are more likely to build relationships that reflect those values. However, when self-worth feels uncertain, individuals may tolerate unhealthy dynamics because they fear losing connection or believe better treatment is not available to them. Psychologists often observe that people unconsciously choose environments and relationships that match the way they already see themselves. This phenomenon can create cycles where low self-worth attracts situations that reinforce the same negative beliefs again and again. For example, someone who doubts their value may hesitate to express needs or boundaries in relationships. Without clear boundaries, others may unintentionally overlook those needs, which then strengthens the belief that their feelings or opinions are less important. Gradually, the individual begins seeing this pattern as normal, rather than recognizing it as a reflection of unspoken expectations and beliefs. Self-worth also shapes how people respond emotionally to criticism, feedback, and disagreement. When self-worth feels stable, criticism can be evaluated calmly, allowing useful insights to be separated from opinions that may not apply. But when self-worth feels fragile, criticism may trigger strong emotional reactions because the brain interprets feedback as a personal attack. In those moments, the focus shifts from learning to defending identity, which can make growth more difficult. Interestingly, the same principle also applies to praise and compliments. People with healthy self-worth tend to accept compliments comfortably because the praise aligns with their existing sense of value. However, individuals with low self-worth sometimes struggle to believe compliments, assuming others are exaggerating, being polite, or misunderstanding their abilities. As a result, positive feedback may feel temporary or unreliable, while criticism remains emotionally powerful and memorable. This imbalance gradually creates a distorted perception where negative experiences feel larger and more significant than positive ones. Another area strongly influenced by self-worth is motivation and persistence. When people believe their efforts have value, they are more likely to continue working toward goals, even when progress appears slow or uncertain. But if someone believes their efforts will never be enough, motivation can fade quickly because the mind assumes failure is already inevitable. This expectation often leads to reduced effort, which then produces weaker results that appear to confirm the original belief. Psychologists refer to this pattern as a self-fulfilling cycle, where expectations influence behavior in ways that eventually produce the expected outcome. Fortunately, understanding this cycle also reveals that changing beliefs about self-worth can gradually influence motivation, behavior, and results. Another surprising influence of self-worth appears in how people interpret their own emotions and internal experiences. Individuals with stronger self-worth tend to view emotions as useful signals rather than personal weaknesses. They recognize that feelings like fear, uncertainty, or disappointment are natural parts of being human rather than evidence of personal inadequacy. In contrast, people struggling with self-worth may judge themselves harshly for experiencing normal emotions. They might think that feeling anxious means they are weak, or that feeling uncertain means they are incapable. This self-judgment often increases emotional stress, instead of helping individuals process experiences in a balanced and constructive way. Self-worth also influences creativity and problem-solving abilities in subtle but important ways. When individuals trust their value and ideas, they fee. Once people recognize how self-worth influences their thoughts, emotions, and decisions, the next important step is learning how to gradually strengthen that sense of personal value. Improving self-worth rarely happens through sudden transformation. Instead, it develops through consistent changes in how individuals interpret experiences, treat themselves, and respond to challenges. The first step often begins with awareness, noticing the internal voice that comments on successes, mistakes, and everyday situations throughout life. Many people discover that this internal voice can sometimes sound harsher than any criticism they would ever give another person. This voice may repeat old beliefs such as, "You are not capable enough," or "Others will eventually realize you are not good enough." Although these thoughts can feel convincing, psychologists emphasize that thoughts are mental events rather than permanent truths about identity or ability. Learning to question these automatic thoughts allows individuals to create space between their identity and the critical voice that often exaggerates failure. Instead of accepting every negative thought as fact, people can begin asking simple questions like, "Is this belief completely accurate?" Or, "What evidence actually supports this conclusion?" This reflective process helps the brain evaluate experiences more realistically, rather than automatically assuming the harshest possible interpretation. Another important strategy for strengthening self-worth involves developing self-compassion, a psychological skill that encourages treating oneself with understanding during difficult moments. Self-compassion does not mean ignoring mistakes or avoiding responsibility, but rather responding to errors with patience and curiosity instead of harsh self-judgment. Research suggests that individuals who practice self-compassion often recover from setbacks faster because their identity does not become threatened by temporary failures. When people accept that imperfection is part of learning, they become more willing to experiment, improve skills, and pursue meaningful goals. Another helpful approach involves focusing on progress rather than perfection when evaluating personal growth. Perfection often creates unrealistic expectations that make achievements feel insufficient even when genuine improvement occurs. By contrast, focusing on progress allows individuals to recognize gradual development, reinforcing the idea that effort and persistence truly matter. Small accomplishments that might previously have been ignored suddenly become valuable evidence of growth and capability. Over time, this recognition strengthens confidence because the brain begins associating effort with positive reinforcement instead of constant criticism. Building self-worth also involves identifying personal strengths, talents, and qualities that may have been overlooked or underestimated. Many people naturally focus on weaknesses while ignoring abilities that others easily recognize and appreciate. Taking time to reflect on positive qualities helps create a more balanced self-image rather than one dominated by perceived limitations. Another powerful influence on self-worth comes from the environments and relationships people choose to maintain. Supportive relationships often provide encouragement, constructive feedback, and appreciation that reinforces a healthier sense of personal value. In contrast, environments filled with constant criticism, negativity, or comparison can gradually weaken confidence and self-belief. Recognizing the impact of social environments allows individuals to seek connections that encourage growth rather than reinforce insecurity. Setting boundaries also becomes an important part of protecting self-worth within relationships and professional environments. Boundaries communicate that personal time, energy, and emotional well-being deserve respect and consideration. Many individuals initially find boundary setting uncomfortable because they worry about disappointing others or creating conflict. However, learning to express needs respectfully often strengthens relationships rather than weakening them. When people understand their own value, they naturally begin making decisions that support emotional well-being and personal growth. Another effective method for strengthening self-worth involves stepping gradually outside familiar comfort zones. Trying new activities, developing skills, or pursuing opportunities creates experiences that challenge old beliefs about personal limitations. Even small achievements in unfamiliar areas can provide powerful evidence that the mind's earlier assumptions were incomplete or inaccurate. Each successful attempt builds confidence, encouraging individuals to continue exploring their potential. Over time, these experiences create a growing collection of memories that support a stronger, more resilient sense of identity. After exploring how self-worth develops, influences life, and gradually strengthens, we arrive at a powerful realization that can quietly transform how individuals see themselves and their place in the world. The most important discovery is that self-worth is not something given permanently by others, nor something that must constantly be earned through achievements or external approval. Instead, self-worth is a perspective, a deeply rooted belief about personal value that can evolve and grow as people become more aware of their thoughts and experiences. Many individuals spend years trying to prove their worth to the world without realizing that the real transformation begins by changing how they interpret themselves. This shift may sound simple, yet it requires courage because it means questioning beliefs that once felt completely true and permanent. For someone who has doubted their value for a long time, accepting the possibility of inherent worth can feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable at first. The mind naturally holds on to familiar patterns, even when those patterns create unnecessary pressure or self-doubt. However, when individuals begin experimenting with new perspectives about themselves, something remarkable gradually happens inside their thinking patterns. Instead of constantly asking, "Am I good enough?" the mind begins exploring a different question. How can I grow from this experience? This subtle change shifts attention away from judgment and toward learning, curiosity, and personal development. Growth-focused thinking encourages people to see challenges as opportunities for improvement rather than threats to identity. In this mindset, mistakes become information that guides progress instead of evidence that someone lacks ability or value. Over time, the emotional pressure connected to perfection begins to fade because personal worth is no longer tied entirely to outcomes. This freedom allows individuals to take creative risks, explore new interests, and pursue meaningful goals with greater confidence. Interestingly, many people notice that success often becomes more achievable once the fear of proving themselves worthy disappears. When effort replaces self-judgment as the main focus, energy and motivation naturally increase. People begin investing more attention into learning skills, building relationships, and exploring opportunities, rather than constantly protecting their sense of identity. Another powerful realization about self-worth involves understanding that every person carries unique experiences, abilities, and perspectives that cannot be fully replicated by anyone else. This uniqueness means that comparison will always provide an incomplete and misleading picture of personal value. Someone may excel in one area while another thrives in a completely different environment, yet both individuals contribute meaningful qualities to the world around them. When people begin appreciating their unique strengths, they shift from competing for validation toward expressing their authentic abilities. Authenticity strengthens self-worth because it allows individuals to align their actions with their true interests, values, and aspirations. Living authentically often attracts relationships and opportunities that appreciate those qualities rather than expecting constant imitation of others. This alignment creates a deeper sense of satisfaction because achievements feel connected to genuine effort rather than forced comparison. Another important aspect of healthy self-worth involves recognizing that everyone experiences uncertainty, mistakes, and moments of doubt throughout life. Even highly successful individuals regularly encounter challenges that test their confidence and resilience. The difference is not the absence of difficulty, but the belief that those difficulties do not erase personal value. When this belief becomes stable, individuals develop emotional resilience that helps them navigate complex situations with patience and perspective. Resilience allows people to recover from disappointment without losing motivation or hope for future progress. This ability becomes one of the most valuable psychological strengths because it supports long-term growth across careers, relationships, and personal development. Strong self-worth also encourages individuals to treat others with greater empathy and respect. When someone feels secure in their own value, they are less likely to view others as threats or competitors for limited recognition. Instead, they can appreciate the achievements and talents of others without feeling that their own worth is diminished. This mindset creates healthier communities where cooperation and encouragement replace constant comparison. Over time, individuals with balanced self-worth often become sources of support and inspiration for people around them. Their confidence does not rely on proving superiority, but on understanding that,